How's it going today, Chris?
Oh, pretty good. Pretty good. Uh, got a little bit of rain before I came over here today, and it may be that way for the next few days where we have a hit and miss little shower.
Yeah, the rain's kind of been getting on my nerves a little bit too. I made a post a little while ago about I'm trying to get used to using this drone, hoping that we can have some better video footage in the future. And rain, just like a regular aircraft, kind of prevents you from being able to do anything with the drone
That's right.
unless you get a super duper expensive one uh that maybe a utility company would use that's waterproof. Um, it's definitely not a good idea to fly in the rain. Um, hey, what was that you were just saying again about
Yeah, I was
interest
noticing.
rates?
Yeah, I was noticing on the. It was actually on the press secretary was asking about uh, or was had made a statement that the president had prepared a statement with a list of countries that had dropped their interest rates recently, and was sending a personal letter to our Fed chair uh, asking why the United States had not dropped theirs, seeing as how we have the most successful economy in the world. And we had, as of yet, not dropped ours. And he was making the point that the inflation had stopped and in a lot of cases had been reduced. And I thought it was a good question why we hadn't, especially since a lot of other countries less rich than we are, less successful, and they had dropped theirs.
Yeah, I this one from an investor perspective, it's definitely a lot more helpful for investors to have lower interest rates. Um, and I think part of the reason why this is a continued argument is if you are, a saver, somebody that just likes to save and use CDs, um, higher interest rates are better for those people. But most of the production from the economy comes from businesses and investors who benefit from lower interest rates. So I tend to agree that I like a lower interest rate environment, and I know that that's been something that Trump's been really pushing for. Um,
I like a lowered interest rate, period.
yeah, yeah. I mean, not only is it helpful for investors, but it's also helpful from a consumer standpoint if you need to buy a car or a home. So, I mean, we're
Well,
pretty.
and you're talking about, um, and everybody knows it's high right now, but uh, 2 or 3 points, maybe even less than that, and you're talking about a lot of people who could now afford a house.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, in some places, those of you listening that are outside of the United States, in a lot of popular places or in a lot of populated cities in the United States, housing prices on average can get to half a million pretty easily. And if you do the math on 6 or 7% on $500,000, that's a pretty fat mortgage payment. So, and I know the U.S. is not the only country that's suffering from higher housing costs. So, you know, you want people to benefit from rising home values, but at the same time, you don't want to price out uh, new homeowners. So
Amen.
we've really got to, I don't know, figure out a way to prevent that from happening. That's becoming a serious problem.
That's right.
Um, did you hear anything about this firefighter shooting that happened the other day in Idaho?
I did, and unfortunately, that's not the first time this scenario has happened. In fact, there have been several throughout, well, at least the last several years, where people have kind of, at least in a couple of instances, made that popular of calling authorities to a spot where they're sitting ducks. And this happened to be one of those. And in fact, this guy, as I'm sure you're about to talk about, made a call where he knew emergency responders would be coming that would be unarmed.
Yeah. Yeah, this is the first I've maybe heard of some other situations and just never looked into them very much because I guess to my knowledge, I don't know of one that's happened close by to us, but this one's made such national news that it caught my attention. Um, and it sounds like I was trying to find, I think it said 300 officers responded to this thing and two helicopters with snipers. I
Mm,
mean,
wow.
and I want to say at first I was reading that they didn't capture the guy, but I think I saw where he killed himself as they were maybe closing in on him or something.
He did. Yeah, he it was self elimination, as we can call it. So we can post on all the platforms.
Yeah. Um, it says the calls about them being shot at followed about 40 minutes later. Um, and the fire that the guy set to get their attention grew to 26 acres, which is pretty wild. I guess I don't know what rainfall's like in Idaho, but I guess maybe it's been pretty dry for a fire to, or maybe it just doesn't take
Yeah, and
very long for a
especially
fire to.
yeah, and especially in the summer, it's the drier season, and that's when a lot of fires can start. For those of you who may not have heard, uh, a gentleman, I say a gentleman, a male, 20 years old, started a fire, a brush fire, wildfire, and called 911 to report the fire. The fire department shows up and starts to handle the fire, and he, with a high powered rifle, starts shooting and kills two of the firefighters. They're taking fire, trying to hide behind trucks. All the while, the wildfire is still spreading, and it's just a chaotic scene.
Yeah. Um, and I mean, not, no life extinguished is a good thing, but what's interesting to me about the guys that got killed, my understanding, it sounds like Frank Harwood and John Morrison. One's 42, the other's 52. This article's saying that their careers in the state span nearly half a century when combined. So that means both of these guys had about 25 years worth of experience and were pretty
Mm.
highly ranked in the fire department. Is what it sounds like to me.
And when you get up as a firefighter, you know the inherent risks that you are going to face when you have to work in these situations every day. However, getting shot at is not one you expect as a firefighter.
Yeah, I mean you expect to deal with dangerous fires, electrical fires, uh, but yeah, having to deal with gunmen is not what they sign up for. Um, that's pretty ridiculous. I really hope that, you know, I'm a big proponent of the Second Amendment in the U.S., which allows us the right to own guns. Um, but for all the, loose cannons that we have out there, we need to figure out some sort of tighter security measure.
Yeah, man.
And I'm hoping that, the continued development of robotics will help us with that. Um, I think nobody wants to be surveilled more, like have more mass surveillance, but at the same time, maybe some robots with some surveillance might aid the situation a little bit as opposed to having to take away folks' Second Amendment. So,
That's right.
um, I see that as maybe a middle ground solution that I hope starts to form more over the years.
And I'm not. I honestly haven't heard the latest. I do know that they had found some information on him. I didn't see what that information was. However, uh, on the initial search, it did not appear that he had a social media presence, which was a little bit strange in this day and age for a man that young. Uh,
Yeah, that is
but I do think they were able to find some kind of information on him, but I haven't seen what that was.
Yeah, I think it sounds like at first everybody was assuming that he had some sort of political motive, which I would have thought too. But last I checked in some articles, they act like he had no ties to, at least not to any radical Islamist group. So, um, I don't know if, maybe more information will come out. Maybe he was rejected because I saw something else that said that he had a lot of respect for firefighters and that he wanted to be one himself at one point. So maybe he got rejected a few times and got really angry. I don't know, but I hope we'll find out more information on that soon as to why exactly he.
And I'm not exactly sure. I think he may have been visiting his father. I think is what I heard because he was currently living with his mother uh, in Arizona, and I think that his father was somewhere there in the northwestern area. Um, and the report that I heard said that he had spent a little time with his father, and shortly after that went out and these events took place.
Yeah. Yeah, tough situation. So I I remember when like I said earlier, when I first started looking this up, that I saw one article that acted like they still hadn't found him yet, but then I saw something else that said he took himself out. So at least at least that situation's over with now. That's I know when you're a trained law enforcement guy, the ideal scenario for you to is to always bring somebody in alive, but you know, if somebody takes themselves out, that I don't know. I mean, not to sound cruel here, but I guess that's one less taxpayer funded person in prison anyway. But
That's right.
yeah, uh, most law enforcement guys are trained that mission success is bringing somebody in alive and no injuries, and but sometimes the gunman takes matters into his own hands and there's nothing you can do about it. So um something to switch over topics to AI. Something else happened that I think is happening that I hoped would happen, which is it sounds like the Senate struck down the AI regulatory ban from the big beautiful bill. So I'm glad to see that. There's a lot of things in the bill I like, but a 10-year ban on regulating I felt like was a pretty sketchy idea.
And if you hadn't already seen, that bill passed the Senate shortly before we started today.
Yeah. So now it's got to, I guess, what, pass the House
That's
before.
right. And then, of course, since it's Trump's bill, if it passes the House, it will become law because it's Trump's bill. He'll have to sign it. But yes,
Yeah.
and also, of course, if you hadn't heard, the vote was so close that Vance had to break the tie today.
Oh, I didn't even see that part. It doesn't surprise me though. I know this has been a heated topic for a little while now, so I wouldn't expect it to be. I don't know. Uh, Tilting heavily in one direction or the other. I kind of expected it to be kind of tight.
And in the big scheme of things, for those who may not know or maybe out of the country, uh, it's kind of a rare instance for this to happen. But when we have a tie vote in our Senate, we have 50. I'm sorry, we have 100 senators, two from each state. And when we have a 50-50 tie, we our the tie is broken by our vice president, and it's a rare situation, but it does happen, and that's what happened in this bill.
Yeah. Um. Yeah. It looks like uh, Open AI CEO Sam Altman made a statement, something like, "It is very difficult to imagine us figuring out how to comply with 50 different sets of regulation." And I mean, I understand his point. Ideally, you know, nobody likes regulation, especially businesses, but at the same time, it's just too powerful and too dangerous of a new, technology to just let it run loose. I would think he of all people would understand this, but I mean, I get from an efficiency and productivity standpoint, it makes things a little more difficult. But and maybe I don't know, maybe this is something that all the states should come together on and figure out a way to agree on one type of regulation as opposed to, like you saying, have to deal with 50 different states and
Well,
50 different regulation plans.
in some instances, it's a good thing to have uh, the federal government to have their hands off. We, for instance, I know everyone is aware of the abortion fight. Even though we did have a federal law, and that's been struck down, for those of us who oppose abortion, having to deal with different states' laws on this is a much better situation to face when you're talking about babies losing lives. And in this instance, it was a good thing for it to go to the states.
Yeah. No, I mean, I definitely, states' rights are probably always preferable to us depending more and more on the federal government for things. So, I'm sure, they'll find a way to work these things out. And I mean, you know, as much as people hate regulation, sometimes, especially with things like these that are really dangerous, you can't avoid it. You got to have it. Um,
Well, I keep trying to, and I'm not an expert on code writing or anything like that. However, I do know that in certain instances, all it takes is a wrong line of code to get in and infect an entire system. And uh, someone who knows what they're doing could definitely wreak havoc with the AI with some lines of code.
yeah, I'm not a coding expert either, but from my understanding of how it works, like you said, is there always has to be at least one back door into any software program. Otherwise, there's no way for people to change the code uh, or make changes as needed, and that back door can also be a way for um, you know people with
And I just don't understand how it could be any different than any other coding. I mean, you know how easy it has been in the past for people to be hacked, for viruses to be put out there, and I don't see how it would be any different with AI.
yeah. No, I would expect there are people out there intelligent enough to create viruses that would, and the more we depend on AI and robotics for all sorts of things, I mean, they could be used for vital infrastructure purposes in the future, and I'm sure they will be. And if somebody managed to give it a virus or hack it, uh, all of a sudden the stakes become much higher in that scenario.
Yeah,
So
when you're talking about things like hospital equipment or nuclear facilities
yeah, nuclear,
or the electrical grid.
nuclear and the electrical grid is exactly what I was thinking about. Um, imagine AI deciding that it wants to launch a missile or eh, you know, a bad actor getting in there and deciding to launch a missile and nobody can do anything about it. I mean, that's the stuff nightmares are made of right there.
That's right.
Um,
Or reposition defense satellites, or you name it.
yeah, yeah. I mean, there's all sorts of scary things that could happen with that. Um, Another thing, and I think this was in the big beautiful bill, and this also got struck down. Apparently, I saw where Sean Ryan mentioned something about folks trying to, or like they were trying to allow the sale of public land somewhere in that bill. So I'm glad that got struck down. I, I think there were quite a few high profile people that noticed that one and got that struck down, and I think Sean Ryan was one of them. So thank you to Sean Ryan on that former Navy SEAL there.
I can't
Um,
unless they're trying. I mean, because you're not. We're so far in debt that the sale of that is not going to do anything to offset our debt. However, I'm trying to figure out. I hadn't seen this, and I'm trying to figure out why they would be wanting to do that.
I, you know, I think from a lot of politicians' perspective, especially in the federal government, they think that by selling land that that's going to lead to business and or economic development. In other words, they think it's going to lead to more revenue, but yeah, to me, some places just need to, you know, belong to the American public, I believe. I mean, we have such a big nation and we have plenty of areas that aren't developed. I don't see why there would be any reason to touch, like national park land and that sort of thing. I feel like we have such a large country in which to operate in that there's no. I just don't see what the benefit of this would have been. So I'm glad to see that that got struck down.
Yeah, I'm a fan of I'm definitely not a fan of our economy and not moving forward. However, I'm also a fan of the public lands that we have, regardless of who owns them, remaining to be wild as they are, and not being developed and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I you know my knowledge on climate science is pretty limited, but you know, and again, I would rather to not see those areas develop, but in the future, if we felt like we absolutely had to develop some sort of area like that, I hope that we find ways to. I've seen where some other places have sort of integrated their buildings with, like I saw something the other day where people had like figured out how to grow moss on the side of the building and still make it look, look nice. And I mean, it makes it, more CO2 and greenhouse gas friendly. So, um, I don't know. Hopefully, we can find more ways to develop in the future and also not, whatever you think about greenhouse gas emissions and CO2 and so on, it's still ideal if we find ways to develop areas while minimizing uh, damage to wildlife in the surrounding areas.
That's right.
I mean, I don't even know how many animals we've had go extinct in the past 100 years, but it's been a lot. Um, but anyway, I I'm glad, like I said, that that got struck down. So, um, well, yeah. So we've got 10 years. Well, the AI thing that got struck down was 10 years. So we just talked about that. Oh, I saw too where moving on to the Russia Ukraine war. Sounds like about 1 million soldiers have died. I believe on the Russian side. I don't know what the death toll is on the Ukraine side, but it sounds like that's been a pretty costly one so far for Russian soldiers. So I know that it sounds like if we have any involvement in that still at all, it's very limited, and we probably have pretty much no involvement now. But still hoping to see that one come to an end soon. Um,
That's right. And it was a big deal for, and this is a testament to our technology as far as the American soldier goes. It was a big deal. It was big news back during the Iraq War when we had 1,000 soldiers die. And trust me, I'm not minimizing our loss of life as our American soldiers. However, we lost 1,000 men at one point. It was a big deal. The Russians have lost a million, and uh, we just have our technology and our ability in many instances to keep our soldiers out of harm's way is stunning.
yeah, yeah. I don't, I don't know how we've managed to have the super low death tolls, and like you said, any loss of life is bad. So, but the fact that we've kept our losses so tight is, yeah, just testament, I guess, to leadership in our military. We've we definitely, I mean, not not all leaders are good leaders, but for the most part in the American military, our leaders are pretty highly trained, and that has paid off for sure. You can never completely eliminate collateral damage or death, but yeah, I feel like we've done a pretty solid job on that front. Um,
And I can tell you, with this administration, I'm pretty proud of who is the are the military leadership now.
yeah, yeah, we're definitely. I'm glad to see us back going towards common sense. I'm not opposed to uh, having a variety of people serve in the military per se, but you know, you have to make sure that when you implement new policies and procedures in the military that it doesn't affect combat readiness of soldiers. Like if it,
Well, I'll be honest with you. I'm a fan of them knowing when they enter the military which bathroom to use.
yeah, yeah. I mean that how many years ago was that when that argument first popped up about, I don't know if that was 2020 or I'm sure it was probably even before 2020, but the fact that we ever started to have an argue who goes into what restroom just blows my mind. I
That's all right.
still don't understand that one. I think people just need to, this is just my opinion, but people need to accept that what you were born as far as I'm concerned, that needs to be the restroom that you're using.
Without question.
I mean, I just, I fail to understand why that's not common sense, but I guess common sense is a rarity now.
That's all right.
Um, let's see. I guess now that's that's the main part of the world news that I've seen here lately. So I guess what we can transition into some now is, for those of you listening, I'm gonna try to explain to y'all how you can find some stock and financial information in case you don't want to use a paid stock screener. So, um, I guess we'll use EPR properties as an example. So I'm in Google right now and I'm typing EPR properties into the search bar. And I'm going to click on the first link, which should take us to their website. Um, and now, typically on these companies' websites, uh, they have on here somewhere, and yeah, like here it says Investor Center. Typically, they'll have some sort of investor link where you can find a lot of this information. You can't see the screen, but under Investor Center, if you go to the EPR Properties website, they have a bunch of different categories. Some examples are SEC filings, news center dividends, annual reports, investor presentation. So if you want to get a better feel for the company without looking at any of the SEC documents, and SEC stands for Securities and Exchange Commission. They are the body that sort of regulates the stock market in the United States. But we're going to click on this investor presentation just to. It's usually like a PowerPoint slide display that gives you some information about a company. So I'm going to maximize this for a second. Um, it'll tell you, like right here, it says Q1 2025 investment spending was 37.7 million, including 14.3 million for the acquisition of an attraction property in New Jersey. So my understanding of EPR properties is they mainly acquire entertainment real estate. So they are a real estate investment trust that trades publicly on the market. They used to, I think, primarily acquire movie theaters, but I think they've sort of moved out of movie theaters a little bit. Um, but anyway, that investor presentation is a good first look at a company. Um, and if you want to get to the really detailed financial informations, it's usually going to be in this SEC filings category. So let's see what we have here. Yeah, you've got forms that are called 10Ks, 10Qs. Uh, I won't read all these off, but these are most of these give you in-depth financial information on the companies. Um, and somewhere I can't think off the top of my head of which document will tell you the total debt of the company and that sort of thing. But and this is again why I like stock screeners, because if you don't have a stock screener, you can still find the information, but you're going to be trying to go through, I mean, maybe even hundreds or thousands of pages trying to find financial information. So, which can be done, but Google Finance and or a stock screener will make your life a whole lot easier on this matter. So with that being said, I'm gonna transition to Google Finance and explain that as well. Um, Maybe this will make this explanation a little more simple. So, um, I know we have a lot of listeners outside of the United States. So hopefully y'all are able to use Google. If not, you may have search engines with similar capabilities. But if we use Google and we type in something like EPR stock, uh, and you look at the top of the screen, you should see an option that says finance. So we're going to click on that. And if you scroll on down the page, um, you can see what the income statement looks like, and it gives you some bar charts, which make visualization a little easier. And you can set it to where you can see by quarter for the last year or so. And you can also set it to annual, so you can see for the past several years what the revenue is and what the operating expense, net income, and so on. And another important figure that I'm not sure if I've talked about much on the podcast is something called EBITDA. Uh, and what that stands for is earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. Um, and that's usually a popular measure of the financial health of a company. So, um, their revenue for 2024 was approximately 688 million, and their EBITDA was 519 million, which is pretty good. That means that barring taxes and amortization and all those other things, they're still earning quite a bit of money. Um, and then there's another category not far down from that where it says balance sheet. And typically, balance sheet information is one of those things that you have to dig in pretty deep into the investor relations portion of a website to find. So, Google Finance is very helpful on getting this information for free, um, and you can find it a lot faster on Google. Um, and yeah, like it says here, cash and short-term investments 22.74 million total at. And really what you want to pay close attention to on a balance sheet is the category of assets and liabilities. Um, so we can see here that their assets were 5.62 billion and their liabilities were 3.29 billion for 2024. So you always ideally want to see assets outweighing liabilities. Um, and you know, certainly in the long term, but if you see it, if you see assets outweigh liabilities on short term and long term, I would say you can be pretty confident that that company has potential to be a good investment. So, um, and then you want to looking at cash flow is a good idea too. Um, if you're dealing with a high growth tech company, typically cash flow is not going to be looking too good unless they're already very large and profitable. But outside of very expensive companies like high tech companies and that sort of thing, ideally you want to see cash flow be in a good position and not negative. So, um, like like for EPR properties, it says free cash flow in 2024 was 291 million, which it's like I said, outside of the tech space, seeing a lot of free cash flow is generally a sign of a healthy company. So that's a good thing. Um, so yeah, is there something else? Uh, Anything you can think of that you'd want to see? I know we've pulled up Tesla before. Um, I'm trying to think. Uh, Apple. Have we ever?
Look up if you don't mind, because I was just looking at some tech stocks that are supposed to be big in the future. Look up primary hydrogen core.
Primary hydrogen core. Okay, I'll give that one a shot. Oh, let's see. Okay, this one must be a Canadian company, maybe. Another thing,
Okay.
another thing that's interesting about Google is when you look at the market cap, sometimes it'll say USD or CAD, and I think CAD means that that's Canadian, but typically for Americans, and I don't know about right. Well, yeah, I don't think the current administration has changed anything, but typically to for Americans to invest in a Canadian company is usually pretty easy. And really all of Europe, uh,
And the only reason I bring this up is it was saying that the use of hydrogen is supposed to be gaining in popularity, and it was supposed to be big by the year 2050. And I know that sounds a lot, a long way off, but I was shocked when I thought about it. It's only 25 years away.
yeah, no, I mean I think hydrogen, you know, for the longest time pushing towards electric has been the big push, but I think the next push after electric is likely to be hydrogen fuel cell type stuff, at least for vehicles.
And just like all of this alternate technology, uh, the only thing that has kept us from taking off in these different areas is the technology. When the technology gets to where uh, consumers will actually buy it, then it will take off.
Yeah, yeah, and the tricky thing about companies like this is sort of a good example of what I was talking about a minute ago. It can be so difficult to gauge some investments like this because typically in their early years they lose money. Um, and although like they're showing for net income a $1 million loss for 2024, which for a lot of you may sound like oh my gosh they're gonna fail. That's not just because a company is losing money doesn't automatically mean that the business is gonna fail. For whatever reason, technology companies, uh, they're just super difficult to run, and sometimes they have to operate at a loss for years before they ever become profitable. And the reason that I tell you that and want you to know that is because you need to make sure when you invest in something like this, you need to have a full understanding of how they might either take on more debt or create more shares uh, to sell to get more money, because if they create more shares that can dilute your ownership in the company. So that's something that I would encourage you guys to look into. um, Now investments like this can be really good. um, I mean, we can think about like Nvidia and Amazon. If you were an early investor in those, you really made a killing. But the key with companies like this is to just do a lot of due diligence and try to get a really good feel for the company. Um, a lot of people would try to discourage you from investing in things like these, but I don't like to discourage it because even though these are typically higher risk, they can also be much higher reward. It's just you have to, you know, do a lot more research on. Well, I mean, you should even big companies you should be doing research on, but I think what was this thing? $20 million market cap or 15 million, 17. So this company is valued at 17 million Canadian dollars. I'm not sure what that is to USD, but it shouldn't be too far off from 17 million US dollars. So typically that would be considered a micro cap company or a penny stock, but and it, I
Well,
hate that.
just think if this, and I'm not, you know, again, the risk everybody assumes for themselves. We're not financial experts and we're not making recommendations, but this could potentially be one of those stocks like if you got in early with Apple. You understand? If this turns out to be big, this is a good opportunity, you know.
Yeah, yeah. And the other good thing about this one is, you know, a lot of people will invest in these big companies like Apple and Tesla, uh, and they'll be valued at hundreds of billions or maybe even closing in at $1 trillion, and the price to earnings ratio will be much more expensive than it should be. Whereas you can buy into something like this for 17 million for a $17 million valuation. And what I can tell you about modern technology businesses is they blow that valuation out of the water all the time. So this one really could be even though it's not profitable right now, this definitely could be a good investment.
Right. And you're
Um,
talking about a price in US dollars of 32 cents a share.
yeah, yeah, that's it's hard to increasingly hard to find. Um, and this is if you really want to make a lot of money and see really good returns in the market, this is exactly the sort of thing that you have to search for. You're not,
And of course, this is one of those that you want to be able to invest your money and sit a while on.
yeah,
Right.
yeah. That's another thing to keep in mind if you're going to touch something like this is don't expect in a year or two to be filthy rich. This is not a get rich quick.
Long term investment.
Yeah, yeah. This is if you've got years and years to sit on something, which more people do than would admit. Um,
But a company like this that has a significant investment early in a technology, they're not just throwing that money in there to throw it away.
yeah, no, they every business like this endeavors to succeed. And speaking on that, another thing that I'm seeing that I really like about this one is their balance sheet. As far as I can tell on Google Finance looks really good. Um, total assets 3.52 million, total liabilities about 138,000. So their assets uh way outweigh their liabilities. Um,
So
so
what we
that's a
were
good,
just talking about on the other stock, seeing good numbers here too.
yeah, very, very. Actually, I mean, this is highly unusual. Uh, Normally, liabilities I see are like most big companies. It's almost a surprise to see them below 50%. So
Gotcha.
for it to be this low is pretty impressive. So yeah, this one definitely, in my opinion, warrants a much closer look.
Speaking of this, Kevin, because I didn't really realize this was a non US company. What is there anything different that you would look at if you were investing in a company that's based in another country?
What else would I look at?
Yeah.
Um,
Or are you looking at the same numbers? Or, what is different about investing in a company that's not based in America?
well, with stuff in Canada, very little is different, fortunately. So like Canadian companies, very little is going to be different about those. And even most European nations, uh, most of theirs are going to be pretty similar as well. With American brokerage platforms like Schwab and Robinhood and some of these others, if you attempt to type in a foreign ticker symbol, sometimes you might not be able to instantly find it as easily as you can American companies. But if you use, I don't know much about Robinhood because I don't use Robinhood. I use Schwab. And what another thing that I like about Schwab is if I believe this to be true. I haven't done a lot of foreign investment yet, but my understanding is you can call a representative with Schwab and ask them about purchasing shares in a company within another country, and I'm pretty sure they could help you with that. But uh, I'll when we do another episode, I'll try to find a good example of something that's a little bit unusual. But for the most part, European countries, Canada, South Korea, anybody that's considered a pretty much an ally with the United States, typically their ticker symbols and their stocks are going to be pretty easy to navigate.
Did it just go up a little bit while we were watching it?
Oh, and China, typically uh, Chinese companies are actually pretty easy to invest in, but you know, uh, where do you want me to go up to?
No, I was just gonna say, did it go up a little bit while we were watching it?
Oh, yeah, well, it might be moving some after hours. Sometimes you'll see a little bit of after
Gotcha.
hours movement.
Okay, just what you said a second ago. Um, I would be extremely leery, and this is just me. You may know better about these financial things than I do. I would be extremely leery about investing in a Chinese company.
Yeah. Well, what I was fixing to say about that is, although they are relatively easy to invest in, something that companies, Chinese companies in particular, come with is something that you call, um, I guess, nation risk might be one way to say it, which means that unlike the United States, um, my understanding is the leader of China, like, and I don't, Chris, I don't know if you saw anything about this, and I can't remember exactly how long ago it was, but have you heard of Alibaba? Chinese company called Alibaba.
Yes.
I want to. Um, huh? We're getting a knock. Um, hang on, guys. I may have to pause this for just a second. We'll be right back. All right, guys, we're back. Sorry about that. Had a little knock at the door.
Yes, after a little brief pause, we're going to go back into our discussion about investing with our buddies, the Chicoms. Yes, I'm sure I'd be interested to know and how many anybody comment who may be interested or who may be invested in overseas companies.
Yeah. So, I think what I was trying to say earlier, as far as Chinese companies go, is um, the danger with investing in some of these foreign entities is that whatever authority figures are in charge, especially in a place like China, if if the country has some sort of supreme ruler or the power is very concentrated in one leader, that's potentially problematic for investors. Um, because I think something else I was asking you about was Alibaba. Um, the reason I bring up Alibaba is, um, I remember, I think their CEO's name is Jack Ma, and not too long ago, he did or said something that made the Chinese government really angry. And for like several months or maybe even a year or more, it was like he just disappeared from public view. Um, and so that sort of situation has prevented me from doing a whole lot of foreign investment myself. I've done a little bit of it, but um,
And I'll just tell you, just from my knowledge of some other situations, China is not opposed to disappearing people permanently.
yeah. Well, that was kind of what I was getting at. Was at first everybody thought, oh, Jack Ma got whacked. That's, I mean, we were thinking it was like a mafia style type thing, but I think he came back, and I want to say he's far less vocal now. So, and don't get me wrong, like I'm not trying to solely pick on China. I know that even though their power is very concentrated, they are. I mean,
And Kevin, this is the kind of thing that gets me really going. I can't stand, there's people that complain and complain and complain about the United States, and we have it so good compared to the other countries.
yeah, yeah. I mean, we,
People may not like us, they may not like your company, but I don't have to worry about somebody coming to get me out of my bed and taking me to prison because they don't like what I'm saying.
yeah, some separation in authority and power, especially at the federal level. You have got to have checks and balances. You can't, you know, you can't just have one guy. I mean, you can, but it's, you know, all the power being in the hands of one or a few people is just rarely a good idea.
Which is something our Supreme Court, at least for now, took care of last week when they ruled about the judges stopping Trump from doing things that they can't do that anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how circumstances develop around that.
And it also shows how important it is who you have in the executive branch, who you have in the Oval Office, who's able to make the decisions about the judges who are replaced. Trump replaced 3 judges, or you may see all kinds of different outcomes in the Supreme Court cases.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm honestly, I remember seeing articles about what you were just talking about with what do you know specifically what type of judge it was that was able to stop uh
United States
stop
District
some of these
Court,
things? District.
United States District Court judges were able, with a single judge, to stop an executive action from the president, and that just seemed awfully low level. And again, I'm not disparaging the judges that are out there. However, for one federal judge, for instance, in a state in Texas, in Houston, being able to stop an executive action that President Trump wants to put forward, it seems awfully strange to me.
Yeah.
And it undoubtedly it did to the Supreme Court as well because they stopped it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not opposed um to there being multiple layers of checks and balances, but when it comes to certain things that need to happen right now, like, you know, I mean, we've been dealing with this, and I don't, people may get mad at me for this, but so be it. But we have been having a bit of an immigration crisis here. I mean, people can call it what they
What?
want to, but yeah.
No, wait. What are you talking about? Immigration crisis.
Yeah, illegal immigration crisis. Legal immigration is one thing, but illegal immigration is a problem. So, um,
Kevin, who's going to pick our strawberries?
yeah, yeah.
Who's
Well,
going to build? Who's going to work in the construction sites?
Americans. No. Yeah. I mean, we need people to be.
Sorry, guys. I was speaking as a Democrat a second ago. Sorry.
Yeah, we need people to be, here legally. You definitely don't want to discourage people from immigrating to your country, but when you do go
Well, and
to
Kevin, if you and I and I was being facetious a second ago, but you and I both know that if people do it legally, not only do we vet people properly, it goes at a speed that we can control and that we can contain and doesn't hurt us. That's the reason that our current immigration laws that we have are set up the way they are so that we don't have too many people come in too quickly and we're able to vet them properly.
Yeah. And, another problem when you overwhelm the system with unvetted immigration is, you know, most of these people, I mean, forget about a legal driver's license or legal identification. There are all sorts of people within the United States, I'm sure, that you can pay illegally to create you some sort of false identification.
Absolutely.
And so, what I'm getting at with that is this also becomes a potential problem when it comes to voting,
That's right.
which
Hey,
is,
speaking of which, did you hear the news today, Kevin, about the FBI during the Chris Wray administration, which is the former FBI director? They covered up information that the Chinese had tried to influence our elections by sending fraudulent driver's license and other information over here so people could vote in the election to ensure that Biden would be elected.
what country was that doing that?
China.
China. Oh yeah, that doesn't surprise me. But I hadn't heard about that, but finding that out to be something that happened, unfortunately, does not
But
would not surprise
unfortunately,
me at
our own
all.
FBI had covered up that information to keep it from getting out to the public before the election. And that is honestly, I mean, you try not to be surprised about things that happen in our country, but they keep continuing to find ways to surprise me.
Yeah. Well, you know, for all the good things that a big government can do, one of the problems that you have with very large government like what we have is there's just so many different potential areas that can become a problem and or a leak. And so it's almost like you're always having to play the role of, I don't know, whack-a-mole, or trying to plug a hole that's leaking, when you think you've solved one problem, another problem appears. Um, and so, you know, I obviously it's, you know, we like a government that can do what we want it to do, but when a government gets so large and so powerful, it becomes much more difficult to keep a good system of checks and balances in place. So I'm not trying to say here that we should shrink our government down to something much smaller than it is, but we certainly need to, like we've said plenty of times before on the podcast, I'm sure we've got to find a way to start paying down some debt, and we have got to figure out a way to make people's tax burdens much more fair. And I'm not talking about even billionaires and stuff like that here. I'm talking about, even though billionaires, you know, pay a high dollar amount in taxes, middle class and below typically pay a higher percentage, which is ultimately more important. So we definitely need to continue to figure out ways to lower people's tax burdens, especially upper to lower middle class, who have for years now been getting squeezed. Um, you know, I want to say most people around middle class are paying, I mean, like 40%. It goes from personal income tax brackets in the United States. I want to say go from something like 25 to 37% or something like that. So, you know, I I think you guys have heard me say before that I'm a proponent of us going to something like a flat tax, that I don't care if you're a company, an individual, whatever, everybody has to pay like 5%, 10%, something like that. Um, I think I think that we would have a much better future if we moved to a model like that, because allowing some people to escape taxes, like big corporations, for example, that's never going to pan out well. And we all have to, and don't get me wrong, I don't like taxes either. I'm typically not a proponent for taxing people, but we all utilize an infrastructure like the highway system that we all depend on. So, I mean, we have to have some tax dollars uh, go into the government, but we just, you can't tax some people and not tax others. it's not a recipe for success. So
And we can't be investing in fraudulent activity in other countries and that those just trying to take care of.
yeah, yeah. So we've, just some more things that I hope to see us get some more control on here in the future. And you know, I said to somebody the other day, thank the Lord for podcasts, which seem to be becoming a much needed, uh, more trustworthy replacement news source compared to some of these traditional media outlets. So, um, you know, two of the big examples that I think of that I'd encourage you to check out if you like our show is Sean Ryan and Joe Rogan. I think you know they definitely have some bias leanings at times, but they cover a wide range of topics, and I think that they tend to do their best to be sort of take a bird's eye view, um, and give you a lot of information that you and we aim to do that on the Divine Economy too. Try to give you information that you might not get from other media sources. So, um, Chris, you got anything else on your mind?
Well, just to give you a little paragraph before we close out here on that story, Director Patel has recently declassified some documents that were found. It says the FBI blocked an investigation into allegations that the Chinese Communist Party manufactured fake driver's licenses and shipped them to the United States in a scheme to influence the 2020 presidential election in favor of Joe Biden because it would contradict the then FBI Director Christopher Wray's congressional testimony, uh, again, in newly declassified FBI documents, and they were obtained by Fox News Digital. Um, that's the story I was referring to. This came out about 4 hours ago.
Oh, this was real recent.
Right.
Oh wow. Yeah, we'll definitely have to. I'll have to dig deeper into that one because I'm definitely curious to hear more on that. That's that's definitely something we got to keep in check for sure.
Manufactured fake driver's license and shipped them to the United States in an effort to elect Joe Biden. Now, you can say what you want to. You can be whatever side you want to, but this is hard proof, hard evidence that they were trying to get Joe Biden elected. The Chinese were.
Yeah. Well, you know, from the results, or thinking about the results from the election, they would have had a. I think they still would have had a pretty good uphill
Well,
uphill battle.
let's be honest. Uh, Regardless of whether you think there was interference or not, I think that it was obvious that there was. Uh, Whatever somebody did was successful in getting Joe Biden elected.
Oh, I'm sure. And don't get me wrong, I'm not. I know we keep naming Democrats here. I'm not just trying to pick on Democrats, but I don't know if it started as soon as George Bush Jr. or if it started with Obama. My guess would be Obama. Um, but I feel like ever since the Obama presidency, I'm sure a lot more of this fraud has happened than we're even aware of.
That's
Um,
right.
we really don't even have a clue how much other powers have influenced our elections for the past, I don't know, 10 plus years.
Well, what the Democrats and the media are famous for saying is there's not a single documented case of voter fraud, not a single documented case. And I think you would have to be extremely foolish to believe that.
Yeah. Yep. It definitely happens, and we've got to cut down on it. But um yeah, I think guys, we're probably gonna wrap it up here because the weather's starting to go a little sideways here, and I don't want there to be a bunch of thunder booms if you heard that last one. So um yeah, I think that's gonna do it for us today, and we'll see you on the next one.
Good show.
Thank,
Enjoyed it.
yep, thanks for being with us, Chris.
Amen.